Welcome to another episode of implementing business solutions in Azure. And we have another use case here today that we need to look into, right? So the use case we're going to be looking at today is, I'm going to scroll up to the top here so we can actually get an idea of what we're looking at. And by the way, this is the actual GitHub repository that we're going to be looking at. So if you want to get to this solution, you can go to the base URL, which is my name. And then in my repo, you can actually grab the latest one, which is the Azure SQL DB API service. And the use case we're going to be going over today is basically around financial reporting. So we have a financial services company that needs to generate real-time reports for their clients by integrating to an existing Azure SQL database with dashboards for analytic on analytics platform. So the company doesn't want to go through the lengthy process of creating a custom API. Instead, we've convinced them to use Zenhay API connectors to expose stored procedures views securely and efficiently. So they've agreed to go with that direction, but they want us to be able to put together a demonstration of how that was going to work. So what we've chosen to do is that we've decided to address the problem statements. The financial team relies on stored procedures that create in Azure SQL to calculate real-time balances, and that's something they want to show on the reporting platform. Right now, they have an existing manual process, which is basically prone to errors. It's very inefficient. They're doing it by attaching by emails and things that are not basically, by the time it gets to the end user, it's not up to date and they need to actually pull another report. And because the human person is pulling reports all the time and they have someone that they're relying on to pull reports and it's pulling bunches of reports, not just him, but a BI guy is pulling dozens of reports every day. They have to open up a task to actually get their reports pulled. So we've come along and said, hey, we're going to be able to provide a connector which will go directly into an existing database and will still adhere to the compliance and the security concerns that I have to ensure that we're not exposing data without having any kind of security around that. We've chosen to prevent direct connections to APIs because that's what they were looking to do for reporting, and we told them no, it's not really advisable because we have to open up gateways and we have to fill out all kinds of security checks and balances to get that passed. So we've chosen to expose an API so they can actually pull that data in. So the client is actually happy with the solution we presented to them. And now what we're going to do next is build out the solution in real time in Azure. Now, this is the solution. This is just a diagram showing how it look. The client's dashboard, API call. We are the API call. They're going to be making through the API through our APIs, and we're going to connect them to their database and then pull information out. The resources we're going to build are just basically going to be setting up a SQL database. We're going to set up a API which requires one or two things: a storage account. We're not going to be doing anything with queues today, unfortunately. I need to clean this up, but we're not going to do anything with queues. And we're going to be optimizing our monitoring. Also, we're going to do a CI/CD pipeline as well. Some of the application settings here we're going to be setting up along the way in our function app, and these are the configuration we're going to be doing because it's a configuration driven development or configuration of the code. So we're not going to be doing any coding. So if you're not really familiar with C# code, which is the primary language I'm using to do my deployments, you don't have to worry about that. Some of the key benefits of using Zen API Connects is listed here. You can actually go in and do some reading yourself, but we can get started. All right, so let's go back to the top and start pushing this thing out. So the first thing we're going to do is, if you're familiar with GitHub, you can actually fork the code down from here. And I'll advise you to do that. Not code spaces. Code spaces is something that you have to pay for. You do get a limited amount of spaces for free for the first month, but you have to pay for that going forward. And what that does basically spins up a version of VS Code in Azure. And that way you don't necessarily have to download a copy on your local machine, right? I recommend use local. And with that being said, I recommend going to use VS Code. I have this open here already. You can download it. You can just hit the download button here. You can download it for Windows, which is recommended, and then you get a lot of capabilities baked in. It's not just used for C#, but you can see that it supports a flavor of languages here, as well as Python, and it integrates well with GitHub. That's the reason why I recommend using VS Code. When you do download that, this is what it looks like, right? So this is an example of what the code will look like. I downloaded that on my local machine. It's very, very lightweight. There's a boilerplate code here, which is about 55 lines. You don't need to touch that. That's actually baked in, so you don't have to worry about that. Once you fork to you down, it looks like this. A couple of extensions are required to get going. You need to have an Azure account, which basically allows you to authenticate into Azure. You get this big A. And you also have to have a Azure function, which allows you to deploy the function app, which you're going to be using today. And once you have that, it will look something like this. You can right click and you can sign in. You may not be, you might look like this when you originally start up, but you can right click and you give it the option to sign in. And when you sign in, you should have some default resources that are provisioned for you, right? All right, so let's just swing over to the portal site to see what that looks like. So if you're new to Azure, you can go to portal.azure.com and then we can authenticate with your own corporate account or your Hotmail account will get you in. And you should land on a subscriptions page over here. And the way it works is that your subscriptions is the top level node. And in your case, you have your resource group, which is the next level down. And inside that resource group, you have your inside of resource group, you have resources. So what we're going to be doing is creating a brand new resource group. And we're also going to be putting in some resources in that resource group. All right, so we can get started with that. So now we've got these extensions in place. We can right click on the function. We go into advanced tab. I'm going to walk through that. Now your function app has to be globally unique. So we're going to go with training 2024 11, sorry, 12 02, right? Let's see what that's available. I'm going to go with a consumption plan. Now, the reason why I'm choosing a consumption plan because I don't want to manage my service plan right now. And the consumption plan elastically grows, so it vertically grows as needed to add more machines if we hit capacity. The premium plan is more for dedicated. So I mean, you know the number of physical servers you need, so you create a premium plan that you can elastically grow to those number of servers that you have provisioned to use to scale to. An app service plan just gives it different options or type of plans that they have on their server. I always recommend using a consumption plan to get out of the box. If you want to get into a production environment, I would say go with an app service plan. And if you really want to get into heavy usage, dedicated space, your own physical machine like a data center, but Microsoft manages it, go for a premium. Locations, choose somewhere that's close to where you live. My region is East US 2, so I'm choosing that. I'm running C Sharp .NET 8, so I'm choosing that. And I've chosen to use Windows as my operating system, but you can also use Linux. The resource group conversation we had earlier, this is where the resource group gets created. I'm going to use the same, use the same name. It's telling me that I can't use uh, 1202 because that might not be available, but let me try that again. Sometimes then create a storage account, which I'm going to use. And it's telling me that 1202 is not available, but it says that's already taken. So I'm going to use 1222. It's kind of intuitive. If you notice that a number is taken already to try and create a new name so you don't have to figure it out. And now we're going to create application insights, which is actually important for us to use today. And we're going to keep the same name because that's what the name that's provided to us. And then it's going to go out and create those resource groups for us. So now if you scroll over to portal.azure.com and we are in the resource group section here, and if I do a refresh, you might see a resource group show up here in a few seconds. There we go. So the resource group has showed up here. Then you start seeing some resources getting dropped in here. The app service plan, like I mentioned to you before, is basically a consumption plan, and I will just spend like a second discussing that. Sorry. So the when you choose a consumption plan, Microsoft takes away some capabilities out of the box. You can't do networking because they own it. You can do scale up or scale out. Now, what scale up or scale out? Scale out means I can vertically scale, meaning I have one machine and it has a predefined CPU and IO and memory usage. Rather than actually beefing up the memory or the CPU of that physical server, I just buy another one. That's basically what horizontal scaling means. So I can actually scale my law across multiple similar servers. Horizontal scaling, scale up is basically vertical scaling, meaning that if I need a beefier machine, I just upgrade to a beefier machine. If I need more CPU, I just upgrade all the time. So that way I get a beefier machine. So I have one of a specific beefier machine I can use, and that's what Scale Up does. But because we're using a consumption plan, we give Microsoft ownership of handling these three capabilities. If you do choose an app service plan or you do choose a premium plan, you will have this three options will not be grayed out for you. So you can actually set it up within your virtual network in your environment, which is recommended for production. All right, so enough about that. So let's go back to our resource group here. If we do a refresh here, we should have a couple of more resources that sit in here. We do have an Azure function. We do have the application insights here. And then if we go into our Azure function, we should be able to go into, open this up and then go into our deployments. Now, there are two ways you can deploy into Azure, right? Into Azure. The first way, which most people tend to do if they're just deploying from their local machine, is to just right click here and just do a quick deployment. And this just deploys the function app into Azure. So it's a minor deployment from your local machine into Azure. I do have a CI/CD pipeline here, so I would prefer to use CI/CD pipeline because all my code normally is checked in into my environment here. So I have no updates right now, but normally I'll check my code into GitHub. And then my preference is to go into the deployment center here, which is for starting out. And then I choose the repository of my choice. In this case, I'm going with GitHub. I'm going to select my organization. Repository is what I'm going to select next. And because we're deploying, what we're deploying here, we're deploying the Azure SQL DB API service we're deploying today. Select main. We're going to be using a user assigned identity. And what a user assigned identity is basically a service account that will authenticate on behalf of the application. So when we deploy from the GitHub repository into Azure, we need a service account that has permissions to be able to do that work, right? So that's what this user identity represents. You can preview the file. If you can preview the file, if you're good at YAML, and you can inspect it. If everything looks good, you can close it and then you can save it. And what this is going to do is going to actually write this file because it has permissions now. It's going to write this file back into Azure, into the GitHub repository and create a YAML file for us on our behalf. So we don't necessarily have to worry about building one ourselves. That's the reason why I recommend going this route if you want to get started, is to allow you to just create a starter YAML file. Now you can go into the YAML file and make changes to it. So you can enhance it to include things like setting up application settings. Maybe you can have some deployments if you have any files that you want to get pushed out into Azure, you can do that as well. But we can actually click on this now and we can go in and see the build process running. And this is actually created a YAML file that we can look at. If you look at the work file itself, this is a YAML file. This is the same file we just looked at. And it actually obfuscates client ID, tenants, and secrets because we don't want that exposed publicly. So that way it keeps it very clean. And everything is just out of the box as is. So I made sure that code actually works out of the box. So we're good to go here. Now, if we go back into Azure now, that is getting deployed. That will take a couple of minutes to get deployed. So let's go back into our resource group and continue down that path, right? So we go to our documentation, scroll down here. We're going to set this up in a minute. But one thing we need to do before we do that is that we need to build out the SQL database piece, which is what we're going to do here. We're going to set up the SQL database. So in our resource group, we're going to create a new Azure SQL. This is called Azure SQL. And we're going to have three options here. So the first option here is to use a SQL server virtual machine, which is basically what you have on-prem, similar to a data center. Or you can lift and shift. The only difference is Microsoft will provision the physical VM for you and deploy the actual SQL server that is required on that machine before they hands it off to you. You can still RDP into it and you can set up networking yourself once it's completed. So this is an easy path into Azure. The secondary path is a midway path where you hand Microsoft ownership of the physical server. There's no RDP. You can still use Management Studio and everything else that comes with it, but you actually just connecting through a connection string and just using Management Studio that way. And then you don't have to build your own server. Now the third option is the recommended option I will go for. If you are new to Azure, you're going greenfield, I recommend going with this third option because you have a lot of benefits that come with using the third option, and we can go through that. So the first thing we're going to do is create a database, right? So we're going to create a database name. and we have to create a server. So it's still nomenclature is still the same. You need a database, you need a server. That's not going to go away. So we're going to create one called training 2024 1202. We're going to keep that name. We're going to create a new server because we don't have one. We're going to keep the same name. And then we're going to default to the same region that our function app is in. So that's East US 2. And this is very important. This area here, authentication methods are very important because you can use Microsoft Intra, which is formerly Active Directory, or you can use both with SQL, or you can use SQL by itself. We do not have Intra set up, so we're going to use SQL. So we're going to go create an account, call it SQL admin, and we're going to provide the credentials for it. Copy matches. There we go. So we're good to go here. We keep continue here. And then the other thing that you need to take into consideration once this is all set up is that you need to choose your database option. Now, to get started, I won't go through all the details of this, but the default out of the box is always a 2 core 32. But I'll recommend choosing something that makes sense. So I'll go with something that is budget friendly. This is the one I'm choosing here. And then I'll recommend going with something like 100 if you're ingesting a lot of data, or 200 if you're just a lot of data. I tend to go with 100 to get started because we're going to be seeding some data along the way as well. So I'm going to go 100 DTUs. Apply that. Now, backup is important. Take consideration here. You have to make sure that you choose a backup that makes sense to you. Local redundant means basically just one copy in your data center. Zone means two copies in two separate data centers in the same region. Geo redundant means that you have a backup in a separate region. And then in this case, you want geo zone redundant, which is basically backup in two separate regions. That's what we want. We want to do backup. The default is to get started to make sure you have a backup in one region and another rather than two copies in two separate regions is the geo redundant backup storage, which is what we're going to go for. Leave everything publicly accessible. So leave everything with no access. We leave the defaults as is. We're not setting up any redirects. We're going to go with that. And then there's an option when we get to going back to next. You have the defender. We're going to leave the defaults. We're not going to do anything with that. Go next. And then we're going to choose a sample database. I'm going to seed this database with the EventureWorks. So as we have some data to get started, we can test our APIs. Hit next for tags. Tags are very important because that means that we can build correctly. We hit next, and then we hit create. And that's going to go off and create that database. So while that's getting created, now we can go back to our resource group. Anytime you're in doubt, we go back to our resource group. And by the way, maybe I didn't mention this before. This is going to be a 3-part series. So this part is just about setting this up. Part 2 is going to be about testing our APIs, and part 3 is going to be focusing on monitoring. So we can go back into our function app and have a look and see where we are in the process. Now, everything was deployed successfully. We should see a green enabled sign. Everything should be golden. I tend to click on this plan. Sorry, go back here. I tend to click on this plan here, but sometimes it shows up as error in the runtime. It's a sort of an error in the runtime. So I tend to click on this plan here to see whether the site is up. So everything's up and running. So it looks like everything is working as expected. The deployment was successful. So now we're going to go into the section of where we're going to be doing some configuration here. So I'm going to go into my configuration here. We're going to go back to our documentation. And we're going to go straight down to application settings. So we're going to set up a couple of things. This one's already set up. Let's go back here. Sorry. This is already set up, so we don't have to worry about it. We're going to be setting up the remaining 5 items here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. So we're going to do a config, keep track of everything. I'm going to go into here. Config path is going to be config. I'm going to show you where later on we're using that. I'm going to add the app key name, which is XAPI key, sorry. And we're going to add, so we have the app key name. We're going to add the app name, storage account, which points back to our web storage. I'm going to add a database, which is the last piece, which is actually getting deployed as we speak on the side. We're gonna get app key name. The app name is the next one we're gonna add. We're gonna keep that simple. Let's hope this is available. 2054, 1202. Apply that. We're gonna add we're gonna add a storage account name, which is going to point to the actual storage account itself. And then we're going to go back to documentation. As you can see, that just recently just got deployed. We're going to add the final step, which is the database connection string, which just recently just got deployed while we're actually setting this up. So I'll leave that open up another window. The beauty of Azure, you can multitask, right? So you can have multiple things running at once. So now we have a database set up. Now we can just go and grab that connection string. Let's go here, go back to our resource group, go back to our database, go to our connection string. I'm going to grab that connection string as we speak. Go in here, paste that here, and we're going to change this here to represent the password I put in. That's it. Yeah, apply. Yeah, apply here. We're confirming that. And this should be ready to go. So the next thing we're going to set up is the storage account, right? So we're going to just spend maybe a couple minutes on storage account, and in next session we can start doing some testing. So I go back to my resource group. As I said in doubt, always go back to your resource groups if you have any challenges trying to find things in here. Going to set up the actual storage account. So we already have a storage account provision as part of the API deployment, right? So when we set it up, we can go into that and have a look at what it is. Now, storage account is one of the million problems. I always tend to use storage account as a place to store files. Use storage account to have a whole entire session around storage account. So we can actually cover that. What we're going to be focusing on is containers, but you do have containers, file shares, queues, and tables instead of a storage account. But all we care about right now is a storage account. The containers. I'm sorry. So before you set up the containers, we need to go into the configuration section and turn off Active Directory or intra ID, because that's enabled by default. Microsoft tries to put security in front of you. We can disable that. You have a lot of issues trying to create things in Azure if you don't turn it off. So if you go back here, if you go into our containers, we're back in here now. Then we can add another container that represents what we're going to be putting in our code base. So we add a new container called config. And then if you go into our code base, let's going to create that for a second. We go to our code base. We're going to be uploading this file. Now, I'll recommend if you have a CI/CD pipeline, add this, extend the YAML file to include the deployment of it into your storage account. If you're confident you can build a pipeline for that, I'll recommend adding this to your pipeline deliverable so it makes sense. We can upload this to the storage account directly from here, which I don't really recommend doing because sometimes it doesn't do it properly. I recommend just revealing and explore from here. Then you can actually get it done from here. It's much more reliable browsing from it from the portal site. So I'm just pulling this up. Close this. That's just got created. Click on this. And we're going to upload our first file. I'm going to browse for it. A little slow today. I'm going to select the storage account, which we're trying to upload. I mean, the actual config file we're trying to upload, sorry. And give it a second. Things are a little slow today. We're good to go. So I just want to quickly scan what's in here, and we can come back in part 2, and then we can do some testing. So basically, this is a config file that we're going to be using because this is a big config-driven development. So we're going to have a couple of things in here which we're going to be manipulating to get what we want. So we're going to come back in here and we're going to make some adjustments in real time so we can see us walk through the process of creating a query. So this is going to be a search query, which represents searching the database, which you don't have right now. And then the connection string to our database is fine. We don't need to do anything here. We're going to be good with that. So this is basically our search query. So we're good today. So we're going to save that. And we're going to come back in part two to start doing some API testing. Hopefully, I see you in the next session. Thank you very much.